Friends and fellow citizens, this is the first time we meet here and allow what I'm saying to you and your responses, because what I'm saying to you is as important as your response to what I'm saying to you. And it's going on live. For 5 years, preach blood, sweat and tears, or talk about the apocalypse. We have done well. 6 superb years. A magnificent performance against all the odds. So much so that everybody says, but of course, everybody knows that Singapore was a very well-endowed place, geographically favored by the gods, good infrastructure, communication, sea, air, land, good banking system, skilled workers. Oh, it's just natural course of events. It wasn't, We made it so. And if a lot of the stupid things I read in the newspapers, if the people who wrote those stupid things were listened to, you won't be here, I won't be here, we won't have this occasion. You won't have flowers. Every potted plant means effort, organization. Somebody with green fingers, fertilizers. It could have so very easily been otherwise. And the more we progress, the wider the gap between us and those not so fortunate as we are, which worries us. Not because, we are moved purely by humanitarian considerations. We are moved by our own self-interest as a people, as a country, as a government representing a nation in the making. A nation which is slowly forged and tempered. It's a problem which will grow. You see, the graph, if you take off at the speed we are taking off, Japan takes off even faster. According to Herman Kuan, he says the Japanese double their GNP every 5 years. So every 10 years they quadruple their GNP. So it goes up like a jet aircraft. Short takeoff, and suddenly from 1,000 feet, in a few seconds, it reaches its optimum flight level of 33,000, pressurized at 5,000 to 6,000 feet. Now, have you seen one of these old Dakotas? It goes along the runway. You wonder when it's going to take off. And if it doesn't take off, well, it'll crash into the fence, perimeter fence. And even when it takes off, it's a straight line. There's no rapid curve. Now, we have got onto that development track. We are aft. Provided, of course, nobody begins to do stupid things, or we allow anybody to do stupid things. And definitely, my colleagues and I haven't got soft-headed. You know, people think that we talk about the new generation leadership. That's quite right. We talk about it now. We talked about it in '66 when we started pushing in new blood. We can't designate our successors. Nobody can. Not even kings can. You look at the Australians. Robert Menzies, one of the most outstanding Australian prime ministers, in fact, one of the most outstanding prime ministers of the post-war world. He tried very hard. Whilst he was still in the prime of life, mentally, at 70, he said, "You, Harold Holt, take over." And Harold Holt went swimming, and you see the shambles that they have had to face. Well, all we can do is to provide a group of able, honest, I hope, dedicated men. Then out of them, somebody will emerge as center forward and captain. Then there'll be a goalkeeper, half-backs, full-backs, and so on. But it doesn't mean that because we talk about that, therefore, Dr. Goh, Dr. To and me and Ong Pang Boon. Ong Pang, by the way, is only 40. We are here, we are going to be here for this decade. And there are some, like Ong Pang Boon, who's been with us for many years, who will help bridge that transition. I'm 47, he's 40, so as I hope we fade away, or rather, we sit back after we've done our stint, this place still ticks. For history is a very long time. And let me tell you why we are always calculating, not for tomorrow or next year. The first thing required of any political leadership, particularly in a new developing country like Singapore with precious little natural resources, all that we have got are on our two hind legs, a good torso, two arms, skillful fingers, two bright eyes, and what's in there, and the data that's fed in. That means organization. Most governments think of tomorrow. Most political parties in Singapore think of tomorrow. So we say, yes. Mr. Tang Si Chim wrote a letter to all our party branches. I told him to. He's acting organizing secretary. I said, tell the party branches to jack up the organization. I'm going to go around and have a look. Well, naturally, 48 party branches, it must leak out. So they say, elections this year. Because next year there will be a slum, you see, the British have gone. So they get active. Yes. These are puny men of straw. Even straw will fall down with gravity. I mean, these are men of feathers. White feathers. Do you know some of them? You know a man, not when things are going well. You know the man when things are grim. You cross a line beyond which we consider the security and the future of Singapore to be jeopardized. Do not believe that we have gone old and soft. As I told one of them, in this, I don't know about boxers, after 30 they decline, but I can tell you that in the political arena, de Gaulle went on till 79. He died at 80. Eisenhower went on till 80 plus. He died at 90 plus. And with the years, you develop a razor-sharp edge. You seldom use it because it's not necessary. But it is only not necessary because they know it is quite credible. Quite credible. Chinese proverb says, 叫胡子杀鸡. You call the monkey, you say, watch this chicken. Now you understand. And the monkey understands. What is in store for us? I think more years of, 2 years of continued prosperity. I believe next year will be better than this year. The indicators, all the economic indicators show that. And maybe 73 is even better, will be even better than 72. But what happens after 73? Well, that depends. Mr. Nixon is going to have a ceremonial visit to Peking. For 20 plus years, every night, Peking radio has berated him. The American government, the American president, and Nixon also, as the greatest enemy of mankind, of peace. Now they say, welcome, which means that you must put out the red carpet, 21-gun salute, because he's the president. Guard of honor. That's, you don't just go there and then you get insulted. Not when you are the world's greatest power. And not when you are President Nixon in an election year. Presidential election year. And this is a lesson of what can and what will always happen, the unexpected. It's very simply put, when we were schoolboys, some of us, we used to put our hands on the table and say, right, you try. See who gives way first. It's not only strength, it's just willpower. How high is your threshold of pain? And I think Mr. Nixon's threshold of pain is very high. He can take a lot of punishment. He got knocked out in 1960. Then he tried for governor of California. He got knocked out in 62. He came back in 68. But you're dealing with a nation, not with just one leader. And the American people have had their fill. They are sick, fed to the teeth with Vietnam. Their boys are coming home drug addicts. 40 to 60%. Every soldier coming back now has to have a urine test. This is the opium war in reverse. 1840, you wanted to break open into China, you peddle opium. Weaken the Chinese people, so you have free concessions. Shanghai, Hong Kong, Canton, Tianjin. Now they give super fine heroin. Super fine. Like Shell with BP, he says, here you are, extra cheap. One shot and you are in heaven. After that, you need many shots to keep going. So they go home. And you know, this is no joke. So you have to call it quits. And when you call quits, it's very sad, you know. You can imagine, Mr. Sato, I like him because he looks a samurai, he is a samurai. He sits down impassive face, just like the Japanese paintings. You can imagine him with his big samurai sword. For 20 years, the Americans say, invest in Taiwan. China, that's not Taiwan, it's China, the nationalist people's China, real China. So the Japanese have sunk a few thousand million US dollars in Taiwan. And not only that, the shipping lanes too. If you just detour a little bit, that's an extra half day. Your cost of oil goes up, your cost of exports go up, and it's a harsh world. And all he got was 20 minutes notice. I am going to Peking, says a Nixon aide to the Japanese ambassador. The Japanese newspaper said, actually the Japanese government had 3 minutes notice. They have not recovered from it. I wouldn't recover from it if I were the Japanese. There are times when even a samurai gets stunned. And see Mr. McMahon, his predecessor, Mr. Holt, you know those famous last words, all the way with LBJ. And LBJ says, well, I will not seek, and if invited, I will not accept presidential nomination. But that's LBJ. You are not going all the way with LBJ, you're going all the way with the American government, which means the American people, their nature, their national characteristics. And the people have decided that they don't want this. They said in 1965, this is the most important and crucial corner of Asia. Now they say it's irrelevant. If the Americans had not gone there, says one of their, they're very good for coining these phrases. That's why they make very good ghostwriters. You go to the Arlington Cemetery, you find beautiful words written. If I were in the grave there and my descendants read those words, I'd turn in my grave because I didn't write them. This one such ghost writer said, if the Americans had never been to Vietnam, nobody would have known that Vietnam existed. And deservedly so. It will be in obscurity. Well, now you want to get out, you say all these things. And the same goes for the People's Republic of China. See, we have always tried to be consistent. You do your sums a long way ahead, don't play checkers, dumb. This is no good. This is a very intricate game of chess. Calculate your moves, at least 7 steps, and his counter to each step you make. So we always say the People's Republic of China. The People's Republic of China told the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese communists, drive the Americans into the sea. They told the North Koreans, liberate South Korea. We are with you. Suddenly, I don't know how many minutes notice they got, but I don't think they got very many minutes either. You read the Daily Digest, you know that Hanoi, if I were a North Vietnamese minister and I read all this, I say, well, where do I come off? Never mind about Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek. 20 years, they keep on sending emissaries to him and says, don't worry, we are with you. How can you be with me when this chap says, and President Nixon has said, yes, that's right. Peking says there's one China. Taipei says there's one China. Therefore, there is one China. And let the Chinese people decide. It's like, one of these shibboleths. An Asian solution to an Asian problem. That's what Sukarno used to say. See, the Chinese told Sukarno, told Sukarno, by Chinese I meant, the People's Republic of China, told Sukarno, says, Asian problems must be solved by Asians. That means during konfrontasi, 10 million Malaysians will solve the problems of 120 million Indonesians. And never forget this. If I can choose a contemporary metaphor or a figure of speech, but they are dangerous. It's just a vivid illustration of how we should, being a small country in a strategic position, how we should try and avoid being sacrificed as pawns. Every rocket, every capsule has got some thrust. Go into orbit around a planet which you can get out of its orbit if you want to with your thrust. So we don't want the Americans going around the American orbit. You get sucked. The gravitational pull is such that you will land whether you like it or not. Or you go around the Russians, you will land deep in Siberia. So we say, no, Commonwealth 5, that makes sense to me. That's the British, that's the Australians, there's the New Zealanders, that's the Malaysians, that's us. And we got enough thrust. You see, this is like the moon, you see. And the Apollo capsule, so we say, why? You are leaving me? Well, all right. Well, good luck to you. We have to part company. Often in sorrow. Old friends, so we sing Auld Lang Syne and we have the comfort of knowing that we've got enough thrust to get off onto a new track and keep on thinking of the other possible tracks. That's what we must do, and meanwhile make use of the time. The best that can happen after the Nixon visit, South Vietnam becomes neutral. 73. Nixon says, there you are. The South Vietnamese are given a fighting chance. The Americans have discharged. Now, if I were Nixon, this is what I want to do. Have discharged their task honorably. Not that the South Vietnamese must win and the anti-communists in Saigon control the country, but they're given a fighting chance. Here you are, M16, we pay $350 for every rifle. They give free of charge. Helicopters, mortars, ships, aircraft, all free. Now you've got a fighting chance. And perhaps they are able to stay and hold and stick. Then Laos, Cambodia neutral, Thailand, still some American troops. Then Malaysia solves her economic problems, her social problems, her cultural, intercultural problems. And we hope the 5-year development plan will help resolve these problems. Because it's in our interest. A booming, peaceful, prosperous Malaysia as a neighbor. Even if they don't import or export via Singapore, is good for us. That's the spin-off in so many things. And Indonesia recovers from the mismanagement of the Sukarno era. Slowly rises. Then peace and prosperity. And naturally, we move like this jet. And perhaps we go on to a spacecraft. Don't just stay at 30,000 feet. We get into a jet up into outer space. From an industrial, technological base, we become the sparking plug for development. We provide the banking, the expertise, the brains, the consultancies, all that you can think of. You want to build a hospital complex? There's a team we can do it cheaper than any American team. Because we know the conditions. And we probably have quite a number of Americans in partnership with us. And whatever you want to do, we can do as well, if not cheaper, because we are here, on the spot. So, as our economic experts tell me, he says, we go on from physical servicing to brain servicing. That means we upgrade the level of our performance. But mind you, there still have to be the road sweeper. The chap's got to collect your garbage. We have to mechanize because our young men, having been to school, they don't want to do that. So now we get work permit holders to do it. And after a while, there's a limit, you know. You see the work sites. 60 to 70% are non-Singapore workers. They work harder. They take greater risks. What they earn here is 2 to 3 times what they can earn in their own country. But we carry a social load. They dirty the place. You know, they were not brought up in our school system. They litter it. It's a problem. And if you take too many, then instead of our values being superimposed on them, their values, they will bring us down to their values. Because it's easier to be untidy, scruffy, dirty, antisocial, anti-government than to be disciplined, well-behaved, and a good citizen. Now, supposing the worst happens. You know, sometimes I get glimpses of what may go wrong. Instead of Saigon sticking, Saigon sinks. Collapse, like the KMT in China. Laos, Cambodia, technically neutral, actually, you know on whose side they are on. Then what about the Thais? There are 7 big, huge, whacking B-52 air bases, from which even now the Americans are taking off and bombing what they call the DMZ, Demilitarized Zone. I always wonder why they call it Z, but anyway, it probably is the Dutch influence. And the Vietnamese, they borrowed a lot of words, and with words, ideas, concepts, values from the Chinese. So, you know, there's a saying which says, 以牙还牙, 以血还血. A tooth for a tooth, and our blood debt must be paid in blood. Well, you know what will then happen. The rest, you can do your arithmetic. So can I. And so must a lot of our officers who sit down and say, look, assuming the worst happens, what are the possibilities of 1, buffering Singapore from the shocks? 2, like an earthquake, you build a building with floating foundation. So, however big the quake, you can survive. Maybe a few cracked windows, but the structure will hold. And that's what we are trying to do. And never mind what the newspapers tell you. If they know as much as we do, they should be running Singapore, isn't it? Particularly those who have just come out from the university, They just come out from school. And as for those who pontificate, the expatriates who come out here, well, I enjoy reading. It's good English. They write good English because it's their language. Do they know the place after 2-3 years? Some of them have just discovered that there are in fact 4 different societies in Singapore. There's the Malay educated, there's the Indian educated, there's the Chinese educated, there's the English educated, and there are Chinese who are English educated, and there are Chinese who are Chinese educated. Just discovered it. Eureka! We did this calculation way back in 1940. And we shaped the education policy so that language did not become an issue, as it has in several countries. And I'll leave you with this thought of what can go wrong and what could have happened. I went to a university, well established, recently. British had established it 20, 30 years, no, 30, 40 years ago. Engineering faculty ran simultaneous classes in 3 languages. 3 languages. So the Vice Chancellor put on his tie to show me that his PhD is not from this university. He knew that I was educated abroad. He put on an Oxbridge tie, one of the ties which he knows I would recognize. So his PhD is a real one. He took me around. So I said, you run 3 classes every year? He says, yes. I said, what about the textbooks? He says, well, they translate the textbooks. I said, you translate all the journals? He says, no, just a basic textbook. So I said, well, how many editions is it behind the original text by the time it's used by the students? He says, well, 2 to 3 editions whilst translating, 2 to 3 editions whilst printing. So the student gets it 5 to 6 editions behind. So we went to the library, I had a look at it. He says, there you are. That's what you call, nation making. Who says we can't do science and engineering? Of course we can. So I asked him, I said, is the translator a language expert or is he also an engineer? He says, Your Excellency, that's a political question. I can't answer that. So I said to him, well, let us suppose that, you have to build a bridge. And you have a team, 6 engineers, 3 in one language, 2 in another language, 3rd in the 3rd language. So, how do they work on one bridge? He looked at me, and his face was very sad, and he says, Your Excellency, that is politics. I am only in charge of the university. And he knew, and he probably suspected that I knew, that one bridge had recently collapsed. So you see, this is not a joke. And it doesn't mean that because you do it today, tomorrow is perdition. No. You do it today, perdition comes 5-10 years later, but it is inexorable. Once you go down that slippery path, you will end up with all the skeletons down the valley of death, where all the broken back countries are. And it's my job, my colleagues and I, is weakened. Because as I said, however good you are, however tough-minded you are, Nixon is a tough-minded man. If the people don't want it, well, as de Gaulle said he was reported by his good friend, the writer called André Malraux, he says, the French people don't deserve France. Climbing uphill, they get tired, so they prefer to walk downhill, rest for a while. And he says, well, that's the end of grandeur. And he says, well, I resign. Well, I don't propose to resign. And if we use the next 6 years, I don't know whether we have 6 years, or even 5 years. We may be lucky we've got 10 years. Then I say, well, my successors, my colleagues and I will hand over to people instruments, organizations which we didn't have. All we had was clay. What we will give them are hard steel implements to resolve the problems that we know must come. So make use of the time. Be it 5 years, be it 6, be it 10. And a happy anniversary next year when I hope to meet you again. Thank you.